Welcome to the 2024 Dodge Poetry Festival's virtual session, Poetry Like Bread is for Everyone. I'm Isabel Gonzalez, Senior Consultant with Poetry at NJPAC, and I'm thrilled to be joined by festival poets Adrian Matejka, Stephanie Pacheco, and Claire Schwartz. In this session, we will explore how we can use language to create opportunities for communities to feel included and seen. Inspired by the idea that poetry is a necessity, this reading and conversation is an opportunity to talk about the ways in which each of us are creators of art and how crucial poetry is to the evolution of our nation and society. Our thought-provoking poets today will each read for 10 minutes, and then we'll create space for a conversation led by our poets. And before we begin, I will open by reading Like You, a poem that serves as the inspiration for this conversation. Like You by Roque Dalton, translated from Spanish by Jack Hirschman. Like you, I love life, the sweet smell of things, the sky blue landscape of January days. And my blood boils up and I laugh through eyes that have known the buds of tears. I believe the world is beautiful and that poetry, like bread, is for everyone, and that my veins don't end in me, but in the unanimous blood of those who struggle for life, love, little things, landscape, and bread, the poetry of everyone. Adrian, Stephanie, and Claire, we look forward to hearing the ways you explore your own landscape and bread, the poetry of everyone.
Peace Dodge Poetry Festival. I am so pleased to be here, Isabel and Claire and Stephanie. It is such a joy to talk about community, especially as inspired by such a beautiful poem. Roque Dalton's poem, I think, has guided many of us in our thinking about poems. You know, community for me and the way that I think about poetry as an object, poetry as an art, poetry as a kind of fluency to be shared starts and kind of finishes with the state of Indiana. I found poems there. I found the need for poems there. I found other people desirous of poems there in places that you'd never expect. So I'm going to read a few poems that I wrote while I still lived in Indiana. And then I want to end by reading a poem by Juan Felipe Herrera. So the poems I'm going to read are all from my book, Somebody Else Sold the World, that was written, the entirety just about of it was written during COVID. So there's a lot of COVID in there, unfortunately, and I'm sorry to bring that back, but hopefully it speaks to the ways that we care for community, whether it's the poetry community or just our neighbors. So it's called Somebody Else Sold the World. And before I knew it, the violet sky flagged with the sun's violent demands. For magnolias in bloom, natural light, any place magnanimous without locks or doors. Different kinds of masks for being and breathing. The antagonists with their vanity tans and usual mischiefs whistled jingles about liberties and war while we buttoned up in our confinement and we dreamed about hugging. We talked about was and when we missed our friends and dentist appointments. Molars fell out without breathable air. Hair forgot its natural colors without testimonies at intersections and barbecues. Words lost their family recipes. Friends lost their words, then lost their parents. A few found love somehow in the gerrymandered grocery lines and farmers' fields, upturned with unsellable vegetables. So the antagonists cornered the curfews, manufacturing arguments with guns at the ready like henchmen. The air around us was so ripe, it might have broken in half if we could touch it. I don't know if y'all remember that particular time. It was very early when farmers couldn't even get out to their fields to do things. So there was just all these fruits and vegetables rotting while everybody needed them. This poem is another Somebody Else Sold the World poem. And during that original iteration of the pandemic, I was at home like we all were and trying to figure out ways to take care of my neighbors and to continue writing poems and to do the things that we need to do. And I kept hearing all these excuses, so I wanted to write a poem about excuses. I mentioned Wimpy, if people remember that character from Popeye. He used to say that he'd pay you back on Tuesday if you get him a hamburger today. And there's also a reference in this poem to the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which was one of the first poems I loved. And then I went back and read it. And now it feels like a very middle-aged, whiny experience, but still how I got started. Somebody else sold the world. I don't know if I should excuses. It's a real good deal excuses. It's not mine even if I could excuses. If I don't do it, someone else would excuses. If I don't play along, I'll be excuses. I'm committed to it now, see excuses. Oh no, not me excuses. Excuse me, I'll get you back next Tuesday. Let us go, you and I, excuses. Excuse me because I loved you so much. Excuse me because I swerved so much. Well, what had happened after it was excuses, where I planned to catch a bus after it, excuses. It was dark and he was dark, recuse me. There was no one to help me, excuses. I was worried about my safety, excuses. What about me, excuses? Excuse me, what about me? Seems sort of antithetical, right, to the way that we should move through the world. I mean, everything got very selfish at that time. And, we're still dealing with the aftermath of it now, of course. So I think I'm going to read one more of mine and then I'll read Juan Felipe's poem. And it's one more of these Somebody Else Sold the World cycle. There were 8 of them. I just realized I didn't explain that the title came from a David Bowie song, The Man Who Sold the World. And the song is based on a poem by Hugh Murrens called Antagonish. And in the poem, the speaker is walking down the stairs of his castle and he sees an apparition. In David Bowie's song, he's walking down the stairs and he runs into the public and pop version of himself and he doesn't like what he sees. So it felt like we were being sold out in a particular way to me at that time. And so these poems are trying to negotiate that. This particular one mentions Poltergeist. If people remember that movie, and I was terrified of it when I was a kid. Somebody Else Sold the World. When I was a kid, I watched Poltergeist on a Tuesday, and it scared me so much I was afraid of the weekday itself. And still, each Tuesday, the long-fingered tree outside of my head is missing some bark. Antagonists all over, mostly maskless as unprepared burglars. They cough without covering their tracks. They leave their shoddy fingerprints everywhere. On their self-congratulatory walk around the neighborhood, they acquit their own nondescript hearts until they burst and resurrect inside a TV's particled white. All voice and hardly any body. It will be weeks before anybody cares enough to change their channel. And my imagination spring forward, the last antagonist in his fold-out throne feels just like a black man for a minute. Everybody crosses the street as soon as he gets near. His pockets are turned out to their white parts, and still everybody acts like he sold the world. And that's a very thinly veiled, all of these poems are thinly veiled shots at Donald Trump. All right. I wanted to read this poem from Juan Felipe Herrera because it's what I thought of when I saw the topic of this. And I'm so excited to hear Claire and Stephanie read. It's called Let Me Tell You What a Poem Brings by Juan Felipe Herrera. Before you go further, let me tell you what a poem brings. First, you must know the secret. There is no poem to speak of. It is a way to attain a life without boundaries. Yes, it is that easy, a poem. Imagine me telling you this instead of going day by day against the razors. Well, the judgments, all the TikTok bronze, the leather jacket sizing you up, the fashion mall, for example. From outside, you think you are being entertained. When you enter, things change. You get caught up by surprise. Your mouth goes sour. You get thirsty. Your legs grow cold, standing still in the middle of a storm. A poem, of course, is always open for business too, except as you can see, it isn't exactly business that pulls your spirit into the alarming waters. There you can bathe, you can play, you can even join in the gossip. The mist, that is, the mist becomes central to your existence. What a lovely poem. That mist, I mean, I'm thinking about the alarming water that it rises from too, is I think a beautiful metaphor for poetry community. I'm going to go ahead and stop now. Thanks for listening.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Pacheco. I am the National Youth Poet Laureate of the United States, and I am so honored to be here. Um, Today, I have some poems to share that are near and dear to my heart. I am from New York City, specifically from uptown New York City, specifically from the South Bronx. And I talk about it a lot. I write about it a lot because it's taught me so much about what it means to live and exist in community, what it means to find something worth celebrating in everything. And that has absolutely found its way into my poetry. It's found its way into how I navigate community spaces, how I navigate my life. And it's my honor to be able to share those stories of my community and of my upbringing through verse. So today I have some of those poems to share here, and I'll kick off with this poem that's a bit of a list of the sort of mundane things that I find that me and people in my community sort of engage in. But what we don't realize is that even these mundane things, these small practices that we maintain amongst each other, even those things, those day-to-day things, are ways that we keep our culture alive, ways that we resist and that we fight back, and ways that we affirm ourselves and our livelihoods. So this is my first poem. Cultural practice is hopping the train together off principle, wrapping newborns in gold, name chains, pouring one out, white candles lit into initials at a memorial, balloons released into the air, bowing to the altar, Sunday dinner, backyard barbecues with no backyard, bringing food across waters and calling it a different name, electric sliding, cha-cha sliding, Cupid shuffling, shuffling a deck of Uno and trash talking, because I love you, slamming dominoes on tables, teaching youngins how to play spades as a rite of passage, naming our children after proverbs we found again, finding common language when all of our tongues point to different parts of Europe, striking grammar into possession, using our bodies as drums, the clack of colorful beaded braids during double dutch, cornrowing ourselves off of plantations, running and asking no questions, making survival stunning, living like there's no tomorrow, like we must be alive to see one. Thank you. This next poem is one that I feel called to share in this space because I feel like it's always a fitting message. I was raised by many Black women. It is something that I talk about often. And when I say raised, I mean in my childhood, I mean in my family. I also mean throughout my career and my time as a poet, I have been held, I have been embraced by the Black women around me. In school settings, I look for my Black women teachers and my Black women mentors in academic settings to guide me through. Um, and it's only fitting that I have some story that lifts up my connection and all of our connections to the people around us in this way. So this is called Sisterhood. It's a poem that I love very dearly for the purpose that it serves. Um, and it's always the right time to celebrate the people that made you. So this is Sisterhood. In the hood, I became a sister. This soil holds my body like it does every Black girl. I know we are Earth's firstborn. We are the souls that cannot die. Black and girl are the most ethereal things I am. Sisterhood has never failed me. It is a force that binds us together. It's the way I look for a Black woman in every room I enter. It's knowing that I am a Black woman being looked for and looked after in every room I enter. Sisterhood is my afro making eye contact with her box braids in a public bathroom. Is the time a woman stopped me at a bus stop and said, she loves my hair, is the mother who spoke to me from a bathroom stall and told me I would be okay. Sisterhood is giving each other a piece of light to carry for the rest of the day, is sharing your magic with another. Sisterhood is my high school friend group, is the time we did each other's edges in the bathroom during our lunch break, how our laughs went far beyond the stalls. It's them gifting me gold hoops and lip gloss for my birthday and helping me count down the days until I finally went natural and reminding me how beautiful I was when I did. It's knowing it took more than a village to raise me. It took the whole neighborhood. It was every mother for every child. Sisterhood is this legacy, is knowing that my mom had sisters, my grandmother had sisters, and we have never done anything alone. Sisterhood is finding each other in every lifetime, is beyond binaries and systems, is trans, is femme, is queer, is every intersection, is understanding no conversation is complete unless it includes all of us. It's making sure no one is forgotten and no name goes unsaid. It's knowing even if the world comes caving in, even if the sky comes crashing down, I got you. If there isn't a meal on the table and this is the last dollar, I got you. If the world ends tomorrow and this is our last moment, I got you. If someone in the office calls your knotless box braids locks and reaches to touch them, I got you. It's the certainty in solidarity, knowing you'll always have love to come home to. It's infinite I got yous and meaning them. I learned to love myself out loud with Black women, to name my coils a crown and a trail to freedom. Sisterhood is learning to love each other the way this world never learned how. It's knowing that everything that does not serve us must come down. It's we gonna be all right. This be a gift I share with every Black girl on my path. In my ground, I say Black sisterhood is a torch, is a battle cry, is love and legacy, is a transcendence beyond. It's a magic that no one can take away. So go shake something up, go turn the world on its head, name a new universe for us to fly to. Burn this one while you're at it in the name of everyone that has gone before they could see the flame, for every Black girl we've lost, for every trans sister that the news couldn't name. You go make sure we are remembered, and remember that you will always have me on the sidelines and front lines saying your name. You will always have us to come home to. Thank you.
I'm Claire Schwartz. I'm really happy to be here alongside Stephanie and Adrian and just sitting in the space of those really beautiful readings. And Isabel, thank you so much for bringing us all together here. I have a lot of questions and thoughts about the nodes that we've come together to discuss, but I think I'll just save those for being alongside in conversation. And I'll just keep the reading short so that we can get to chatting. I'm gonna bracket my reading with two poems by the poet Fedi Judah from his book Bracketed Ellipsis. And the first poem is called Bracketed Ellipsis, or sort of unpronounceable. I am unfinished business. The business that did not finish me or my parents won't leave my children in peace. In my right hand, a paper. In my left, a feather. To toss, to quill, to meet my terminal velocity. I forget Palestine has a kind of way of remembering those who mark it for slaughter and those it marks for life. I write for the future because my present is demolished. I fly to the future to retrieve my demolished present as a legible past, to see what isn't hard to see in a world that doesn't. I'm going to just read 2 poems from my book, Civil Service. Parable. The woman sits at her kitchen table across from a head of cabbage. The woman's mouth moves quickly, then slowly. She is trying to explain. She cocks her head to the side, listening. She is trying to understand. Now she is understanding, nods. Each morning they sit like this, the woman and her cabbage. This is how she grows old, her face a lake the wind whispers to. Every day it's confidence worrying the surface a bit more. On the stove, the percolator sings. The woman worries over the cabbage. She pours 2 cups of coffee. One sits there, a tranquil lake. At the end of the day, the woman washes the cups tenderly, as if washing a body. She knows she is washing a body. One evening, the woman's son comes back. It's not important from where. It's not important how long he's been gone. It matters only that time has deposited in him sarin, legislation, microplastics, and when he returns, he is no longer a boy who sings softly to the moon. The man follows orders. He wields what he's amassed. On the windowsill, petunias wilt in descent. Now there is a head on the floor, smashed as if cabbage. Now there is a witnessing head, silent as cabbage. The boy is the state. The cup is you. No, the boy is your lover. The cabbage farmer is you. Or the woman is a lesson. The cabbage is you. No, oh, the many ways to misread. Or that other risk, the greater one, and what you'd have to do with it. Object lesson. You learn to recognize beauty by its frame. In the gilded hall, in the gilded frame, her milky neck extended as she peers over the drawn bath. A target, a study, a class. To be beautiful, she requires you. You should save her, no matter the price. No matter the price, the curator will take it. Acquisition makes him good. He hangs the woman's image in the museum where school children stand before it, anointed with lessons in color and feeling. Pay attention, the teacher scolds the fidgeter in back. Bad, the child whose movement dilates her own beauty, the child whose wails call to his mother, most beautiful of all. Eyes this way, the teacher syrups. All that grows rots. Good little stillnesses, guardians to be. If you are good, one day an embossed invitation will arrive at the door of the house you own. You will sit next to the curator, light chattering along the chandeliers, your napkin shaped like a swan. To protect your silk, you snap its neck with flourish. The blood, beautiful, reddening your cheeks as you slip into the chair drawn just for you. Sit, the chair says to the patron. Stand to the guard. The guard shifts on blistered feet. She loves you. She loves you not. The children pluck the daisy bald, discard their little son in the gutter. And I'll just read one more bracketed ellipsis poem. Again, this is by Fedi Judah. The fireflies you kept in a jar as a child until their light went out. It was only that one time. Your light is not for jarring. Your light is now for jarring. Your captors translate your anguish into a return on investment. To be good again for all to see. They house your voice in glass. Thank you.
I'm so glad you read those poems, Claire. Thank you for sharing Fade's words. And Stephanie, I was stunned. I know we're going to start talking about things, and I'm not the moderator. I was just really excited to jump in and say some things. I keep thinking about the line from your poem, Stephanie. You said, "I got you," from Sisterhood. I got you. And I was thinking about that while Claire was reading her poems too, and also like Fade's poems. And I'm thinking about Juan Felipe's poems and like this idea of what it means to have somebody else. And, can you talk about that, Stephanie? Maybe we'll jump off from there. Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. That's a line that I really love and that it's there with intention. Well, first, I that term of "I got you" is something that's just always like thrown around in community, like just in conversation, like, "Oh, I got you," or like, "Hey, if like somebody's, messing with you, you call me. I got you." Like this idea of somebody letting you know that they have your back, no matter what happens, you're not going to stand alone in a situation. And it's more than a saying, but like it's an action, it's a practice. Like the practice of "I got you" is, is the other mothers in your community like banding together to raise all the children and make sure that all the kids is getting through school, like that's "I got you." Like that's that practice. If you have food, but your homie doesn't, and your homie need a meal, you inviting them over because "I got you," like, so it's in there as like, the acknowledging of a statement, of a saying that's used, in conversation, but also like this lifestyle practice that we kind of share to ensure our own survival and the survival of each other. And again, I feel like we've all kind of touched in some way about like this whole like gathering here is kind of rooted in community. And when I think community, I think of people who got me and who I got right back. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think about the poets who have done that kind of thing for me too, right? Because I think we all have that experience of this is how we get here now. How many poets have said, "I've got you" in a particular way, or just, "Hey, listen, that's a really bad line, and I'm telling you that because I've got you." Like this. Okay, maybe you don't want that poem out in the world, that's maybe not the best idea for you, Claire. What about you, Claire? How has that manifested in your life?
Um, yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah. Um, I will say like right now I think I'm having trouble holding the conversation amidst a genocide. And I feel like there's a lot, like this is obviously not the first time that we're living in the accumulated midst of all kinds of imperial violences. But I'm just thinking about, what does that charge of I got you actually mean? What does it really mean to have each other and to even be having these kinds of conversations? Like, it feels like the world should stop in some kind of way. And it feels like, to me, that's what it would mean. And to me, actually, I was thinking this as I was reading Betty's poems. That's something that those poems do for me, is they stop me. They stop me in my relation to language. They stop me in my relation to people, and ask me to kind of turn it over and think about the terms of it. I feel like that's not exactly the same point of entry, but I think it's where I'm coming from right now. And yeah, I appreciate the convergence of these histories and the kind of call to think them together.
Right, I'm not the moderator for this. You should say more. Like, I feel like you, like, I'm,
Sorry, I'm not trying to like
no,
throw it
it's
back to
really,
you.
it's really important, right? I mean, that's the thing. That's why I was so grateful that you started out with Fade's words. So, I mean, I appreciated you saying, well, I've got some feelings about this, and this would be the time for them, right? I mean, like, let's have
I
it.
guess I'm like really curious to hear from both of you, but I'm curious what you hear when you hear accessibility, what that means to you, and how you're holding that term. Maybe that's one place to start.
I think we'd love to hear from you, Adrian.
Yeah.
From me about
You can't moderate your way out of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, I was like, wait, I'm not even supposed to be in this role. I guess when you say accessibility, I would love to hear more. I mean, if you're talking about accessibility about poems, I mean, I see that in so many different ways. But if we're talking about that under the umbrella of genocide and imperialism, I have no answer for that. So
I mean, I'm just reading the event description in the chat. Is poetry accessible? How can we
certainly.
use language to create opportunities for communities to feel included and seen? I guess that like
Yeah.
wherever that takes you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that for me, I mean, all of this ties together, right? I mean, I think that poetry is a point of power, and and it might not be able to. So when I first read this, I misunderstood, and I wrote a thing that was about other people's poems. And I was including one of Jamila Wood's poems. That's where I had that poem from Juan Felipe Herrera, because I was thinking about the way that the poem itself and poetry is an object that, or it's an enactment that gives us a kind of power, but it doesn't stop bullets and it doesn't stop imperialism. It doesn't do any of that. But what it can do sometimes is activate other human beings to do that work with it, right? So alongside of the idea of the art of poetry, we can be activated into a kind of politic. And so I was writing about all of this stuff, and I had this little thing, it was timed out 10 minutes exactly with the readings of the poems. And it comes back to this idea of accessibility, because I think that poems are the most accessible art in the world. You don't have to train to try to write them. You don't have to train to listen to them. They can be in Braille, they can be in Vietnamese, they can be in sign language, they can be in anything, and they still articulate what they are. So there's the front end of which a poem is trying to communicate with us, and I think that's the most beautiful, and mostly, and I hope I'm not overstepping, say, in the hands of the people on this call, something that's wanting to communicate and wanting to reach and wanting to be a thing. It's not true for all poets, but I think it's true for those of us here right now. And then there's the second part of, like, I think about it like soccer. Anybody who plays soccer, all you need is a ball and some feet and a space. All you need to write a poem is you don't even need an implement. It can be articulated in the world without it. All you need is an idea, you know? And so I think it is, among all of the arts, the most accessible of them all. I mean, how does that sit with you, Stephanie?
I absolutely agree. Any time that we're talking about poetry and accessibility, I think about Audre Lorde. And I mean, first of all, a phenomenal poet and thinker, and someone who has given us so much language for so many things. But specifically, she says something along the lines of really what you just said, that poetry is the most accessible form of writing, of art, like ever. Because all you need is something to write on. And all you need is like your brain really to create a poem. Like it can just live within you. And I think that's part of what caused me to poetry so much. Like you don't need to study it. Like it doesn't need, you don't need to be someone who speaks with big words, with many syllables, to be like an excellent poet. You just need someone, you just need to be someone who is determined to tell their story, to speak of what you know. Like that's what it means to be a poet. So when I think about poetry being accessible, I mean that like it literally belongs to the people. It belongs to the people. That's the full sentence. It belongs to the people. Um, and I believe that, and I know that, and I see that manifest all the time. Um, and I also, just to like some of the points that we're talking about here, I just believe very deeply in the power of poetry, even though it's something that doesn't take, you know, gold and diamonds to create. Like it it can do so much. And when I think about poetry's place in like social movements and in times of like horror and distraught in society, like I really do believe in poetry as like a strategizing tool, as an organizing tool. And specifically, I think poetry is really amazing in allowing people to imagine what can be, and to kind of like dream and imagine ourselves out of a thing. Like I know for me, um poetry allowed me at a very young age to like imagine the kind of world that I was fighting for, that I was advocating for. And I think that poetry still has that power to allow people to envision something better, and also to be called into action to make it happen. um I feel like poetry is not a passive thing, or at least it can't be anymore. It's not passive. It's active. It's something that is used to activate people, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, and I think people ought to use it as such. Claire, do you have anything to throw into the pot of this conversation?
Yeah, no, so much of what you both said really resonates with me. I'm thinking about Wanda Coleman saying, you can write a poem waiting in line for the bus, like I'm thinking about traditions of people writing poems while incarcerated. I think there's something to say about um the ways that poetry can be written under tremendous material constraint. And I think there's also something to be said about the way that poetry can kind of, as you're saying, Stephanie, like enact almost like a time against time, like waiting is sort of like a non-productive time. You're not supposed to do anything with waiting, but poetry can happen in that time. I'm thinking also of Angela Davis talking about how she kind of like all of the practices that she used while incarcerated to keep track of time, and the way that poetry also can kind of do, it can kind of make a world inside of a world in that way. And I'm trying to hold to those. So I appreciate both of those threads and what you lifted up.
Yeah. What that makes me think of is all the ways that poetry has like already existed as all these things that we're saying that it can be. Like you mention poetry and like how it's like a long-standing practice of people who are incarcerated, like to keep track of time, to keep track of their stories, and all of that. um One, that's something, it's resonating deeply with me right now, especially this week, especially. And it makes me think of again of like social movements, like how, you know, poets in the Harlem Renaissance, like all the stories that they were telling, like the poems that were being written then that were like calling people into action, and then having a whole civil rights movement that followed it some years later. Um, like more about like poetry and its activation. To your point about poetry being used during people's incarceration, I think of poetry as healing. And in thinking about poetry as healing, I'm like walking you all through my train of thought right now. Thinking about poetry as healing, I'm thinking about like how it's also like an ancestral practice, how like our ancestors were poets, how like Black and Indigenous people have used, and I say that because those are like you lineage. Like I think of like Black and Indigenous people and how like poetry and storytelling and like histories being preserved through through the spoken word, like how that's a centuries old practice, how that's always been something that we've used to heal, how like chanting incantations is something that has always been in practice, how it's something that has always been viewed as spiritual and sacred. And that's something that I think remains to be true. And it remains to be true regardless, like it remains true for folks who are incarcerated. It remains true for people who are fighting for justice, and it ought to remain true for all of us always. So I second all of what you said, and all of that has been shared in this space, and wanted to offer that as well.
We're talking about something that Claire, you're on the West Coast, so June Jordan was out there for so long doing her Poetry for the People workshops, and named them after the idea that poetry is for the people in the way that we've been talking about, but also holding space inside of that for people who were incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and the kind of intersections. And was in my little bit that I wrote about my like Black arts movement upbringing, about the ways in which Gwendolyn Brooks uplifted Etheridge Knight while he was in prison, and Etheridge Knight then founded a Poetry for the People workshop in Indianapolis, and the ways that those things get bequeathed and brought out into the world in a particular way, like the help of one, to help one person is to help the many in a kind of way. And then it's just a matter of the scope of that and how it gets shaped in. And so June Jordan. And I don't know, for people who are listening, there's actually a handbook. It's called the Poetry for the People Handbook. That is like a workbook that teaches you how to teach community workshops that June Jordan developed over decades of teaching these in the Bay Area. And it's full of exercises and suggestions and prompts and all kinds of ways to think about how you use poems to create a space where people feel okay being themselves. If they feel like today is the day they need to be quiet because there's something going on that they can't handle, then they're quiet and they can be there and do that. If the day is the day where they're effusive and they need to share all of that in the space with the other poets, then that's offered too. When I think about community, I think about the idea of a place that somehow, as hard as it is, we're able to just actually be ourselves. You know, like there might be disagreements, there might be some like people who like judge in that space, but they don't bring it in like outside of that space, but they don't bring it into the space because that's where we're trying to do the work together. And my opinion about something is not as important as our opinion about something. In that particular poetry space where we're trying to just to raise up language in ourselves. Um, I don't know if that's practical. I don't know if it's a thing that can actually exist in the world, but I always imagine it to be true because that's what happens when my friends and family are together. It's what you were talking about earlier, Stephanie. It's what you're talking about, Claire. Like when you get into a space, that's when those activations happen. When you feel most secure, which means you feel the most seen. Whether it's about the language you're throwing down or the fact that I got you, to go back to that idea, like whatever it is that allows us to enact that small space in a very, very troubled world, you know, like if we're able to just have that one pocket, then good poems can come out of it, I think. And this also might just me being super optimistic about it, but that's been my experience because so many people have supported me in that way. And I hope that I've been able to do that same thing for some other people. Yeah. June Jordan. That's all I'm saying. Like that's where like that whole thing came from for me. Um, okay, so I'm all of a sudden like reading the things and feeling like a moderator again, and I'm not. Claire, can you two like can we go back really quickly to Fade because I love his work so much and I love him as a human being in the world. Could you talk really quickly, maybe if it's okay for me to ask, like why you chose those particular poems? Because the book is phenomenal.
Yeah, can I quickly say something about June Jordan?
Oh yeah,
Then
yeah, please say
yeah.
anything. Like we could talk about anything, right?
Yeah. No, I think she's like such a North Star always. I'm thinking of the essay that the writer Marina Mulguar published recently about, Jordan's kind of unrelenting commitment to anti-imperialism and to Palestine in particular. And the way that that actually really did make her inaccessible to a lot of people. And I'm thinking about, I mean this quite materially, that she was, taken off of a lot of career opportunities that otherwise she was, like that her work was made inaccessible. And I'm thinking of the poet Dion Brand, who says, it's not just that we didn't speak eloquently enough, they had a military. So I'm trying to think also about, like I want to hold the kind of amazing possibilities that we're talking about in these kind of generative moments alongside and within, and also, to think about the kinds of inaccessibilities that are people getting killed before they can even write poems, so just like holding those things alongside one another, which I think leads me back to Adrian's question. Yeah, I chose Fadi's work because I think it does. I mean, first of all, I just wanted to say Palestine in this space. It felt important. I feel like he does for me what I go to poetry for, which is to take me out of my sense that I know what things mean, my sense that I can kind of move carelessly through language, which is the way that we come to meet each other, a real technology of our encounter, without the kind of care that it deserves, that I can kind of just like run through my life, that I can hand to someone else what's been handed to me. And his work really stops me and asks me to slow down and to think about how else we might be together. And I, in particular, wanted to end with the Fireflies You Kept in a Jar poem, because I think this question of the way that poetry can also be made to adorn power, can be made to adorn all of the things that make life inaccessible for a lot of people, feels also like a really important thing to hold in the conversation.
Mhm. Get me thinking about, I think it was like maybe 1981, 1982. I remember reading poems from June Jordan then calling out the same things that we're talking about now in a different version. You know what I mean? Like just so long ago. And also Lucille Clifton, like there were people who were speaking to things in a particular way. And I'm glad that you uplifted that too, because there was a yeah, because it changed the trajectory in a kind of way for the work that they were doing. Um, I'm going to sit with that for a little bit because I was just really so grateful that we finally got June Jordan in the magazine. And when you said that, my first thought was, of course, her poem should have been in here years ago. But right, as you said, like there were like telling the truth and calling things out sincerely as a cost. Stephanie, any last words? Claire, any last words? Because we're almost out of time.
Yes, this was such a lovely conversation. Thank you all for all the poems that you shared, all the stories that you all shared. I am so delighted to be sharing space with you, Adrian and Claire. And this was a lovely conversation. Many reminders for all of us. Yeah. Any final words from you all?
No, just echoing that I'm really grateful to have had this conversation and especially loved hearing your poems.
I loved all the voices you brought into this space, like how important those voices are. And Adrian, that's crazy that June Jordan wasn't published until like that. That's insane to me. But I want to thank you all for this amazing conversation and all the ancestors that you brought into the space and all the voices and activists who are doing the work, you all who are doing the work. And I thought I would leave us with a line from Stephanie's poem, which is, "Go shake something up, go turn the world on its head." So thank you all tonight for joining us, and more to come.